Hello, my name is Victoria Roten, and I am a mental health counselor in Kenmore. It's a suburb of Seattle. And my partner and I, Michael Jones, have decided we are going to attempt to make a podcast. No, we're going to make a podcast, and we're going to focus on the connection, actually, the connection between addiction and lack of connection inside of ourselves, knowing who we really are, and connection with people outside of ourselves. And we've been plotting this for a while, and we decided finally to take the plunge with the caveat that anything worth doing is worth doing shitty. That's been my personal philosophy for a long time, and it has helped me do many things that I am not that good at, but generally tend to get better at. So my hope is that as our time goes on, we are going to definitely improve our performance. Would you like to speak, Michael?
Well, hello, I'm Michael Jones. I am Victoria's life partner and cohort in this podcast venture. I am not a licensed therapist, but I play one on TV. No, I'm kidding. I come with a military and government background and a host of life experiences that somehow seem to fall in line with a lot of the topics that we're going to be discussing. I have had my own struggles with addiction and lots of life connection issues, and so hopefully this will also be part of my healing journey as we learn together moving forward.
And our hope for this podcast is that we could reach out to a wide range of different people. I come from a white middle class background, obviously. Michael does not. We want to invite other people onto the podcast that have, different cultures, different generations, different experiences, so that it's not just a tiny segment of the population that will be interested in this podcast. Did you want to speak to that?
So we want to appeal to everyone. We can't say that the problems that we are going to be discussing are focused on one segment of society. These things impact everyone, no matter where you're from, whether your family was here in the States, whether you're first generation, whether you're second generation. We're talking about problems that can be seen across the spectrum of life around the globe. So this isn't going to be geared or centered toward any one segment, because we're all one global tribe and we all have similar issues.
So the topic that we are going to start with, and hopefully, we have a lot of ground to cover on this topic, is the addiction versus connection topic. And I was going to it's both personal to Michael and I, mm-hmm. and also I have worked with many people over the course of my something like 28 years as a mental health counselor, many people with all different types of addictions, and it's truly unbelievable what people can be addicted to. I'm kind of blown away, but if you can think of it, somebody's probably addicted to it. Me personally, I suffered starting at about 14 from an eating disorder. I was bulimic, and as time progressed and I was able to get things that I wasn't able to get as a young teen, I also became a smoker. I drank heavily. I would kind of be willing to use almost anything to block out the pain that I was living in. And I'll talk more about that, but would you like to talk a little bit about your personal struggles with addiction?
My addiction covered the spectrum. Not in the extreme sense. I mean, there was some drug experimentation, some alcohol, but I think my primary addictions were in the realm of direct self-harm, which I didn't know were addictions until we actually started our planning conversations for this podcast. So, nothing that was technically life-threatening, but, life-scarring. But again, these all stemmed from lack of connection, not just with my family and the world around me, but mostly with a lack of connection to myself. So in the search for connection, I connected usually with pain of some sort. but we'll go into the psychology of that at another time.
Yeah, I mean, people substitute an addiction for what they really need, which is to be able to know and express yourself in the world in a genuine way, and to be able to have loving connections with other people and fully be able to show up as who you are. I know that when I was walking around in the world early on, as a child, I was actually pretty authentic, but as I moved into my teen years, my goal was to be liked, not to be myself, and or to win. I was a very competitive person, so my goal was to look good and I hate to say this, but like try to be perfect. I think that's why my remedy has been, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing shitty, because I needed to overcome that feeling of needing to be perfect, which of course is an impossible goal, which means you will never be happy. I was going to talk a little bit about how I got involved with bulimia. I was, like I said, I think my family was pretty dysfunctional. No one talked about feelings at all. My dad was very angry. I don't think I really remember him being happy. Certainly not sad. He never showed anxiety, but he was an extremely angry person and very uncomfortable with anyone else having feelings. So I knew that if I showed my anger, I was likely to be harmed. One time I showed or expressed an emotion he didn't like, and he picked me up over his head and threw me on the ground. And it only takes one incident of that type of violence for a child to never, ever be able to relax again in their family of origin. And so I knew I couldn't be angry around him. I couldn't be sad. I couldn't be anxious. Another example is I cut my finger really bad. It was bleeding. I needed stitches, and I was crying, and he yelled at me for crying because it upset him. So pretty soon I was just like stuffing down any feelings, certainly in my home, that were not no one around me was comfortable with. And that was the beginning of me losing track of myself. But I do remember sort of a defining moment for me. I probably was about 12. I spent most of my time running around the neighborhood with the neighborhood boys. I had one other little girlfriend, and we went out into the woods with two of the boys and decided, they were super like, please show us your, your private parts. And we were like, okay. So my brother was actually standing there. He was 2 years younger than me. And we offered to give him a candy bar if he was willing to not tell anyone that we did this. It didn't even occur to us that it was inappropriate. I think we were about 12 and he was probably about 10. And we pulled our pants down really, really fast, probably like literally 10 seconds, and then pulled them back up. And then we went back to playing hide and seek or whatever it was we were doing. And I really didn't think anything of it until about a week later. I was in the car with my mother, and my brother said, "Where's my candy bar?" And I still remember the feeling of panic I had of, oh my gosh, he's going to tell my mom what we did. And another thing that was extremely repressive in my family was anything to do with sexuality. Like, it was evil and sinful if you touched yourself. And, basically, again, if it felt good, don't do it. And so I felt immediately that like this sense of, oh my gosh, I am a bad person. Before that, somehow I hadn't reflected on it. But once I realized that my mother might become involved, I was like, okay, I'm a bad person. What am I going to do? And so I just felt literally, I think, in that moment, this feeling, and it's awful and it's hard to explain, but almost like I severed from my authentic self, like something really important about me, which is my sexuality, and that I was, starting to feel it and wanting to kind of express it in small ways, was totally not okay. And I just went, boom. I think I'd been working up to this, but like this feeling of being severed, and literally all of a sudden I could not feel myself. I couldn't feel my happiness. I couldn't feel my sadness. I couldn't feel my joy. I just felt numb inside. And it was horrific. And pretty soon after that, I started to feel really, really depressed because I was like, well, I'll start feeling better in a few days or in a few weeks. And I didn't. And so if you can't really feel yourself, again, you lose connection. I lost connection with my authentic self. You're gonna get depressed, right? And it wasn't even, depression isn't even the right word. It was like nothing. It was like feeling nothing. And that is just such a horrendous feeling. So I started to feel suicidal, and I went to my mom, who was the only person at that point that I thought I was able to express my feelings towards. And I went to her and I said, Mom, I think I'm really depressed, and sometimes I don't want to be here. And I literally remember the look on my mom's face. She had a total look of rage. And she said to me, and this is a quote, "If you think your life is shit, why don't you go and flush your head down the toilet?" Which is, in fact, what I ended up doing for about 10 years. That was sort of like the final blow. Like, I have no one to tell about what is going on inside of me and why I'm hurting, and I'm just cut off from the rest of the world. So at that point, I was cut off from myself, but I still had some hope that maybe there was someone I could tell and they could help me. And when she said that to me, I literally was like, I'm cut off from the world. And that moment, that is the impossible bind. Can't feel yourself, can't talk to anyone else. You've got to have a drug. And that drug for me, because it's the only thing I could get a hold of, was food. And, I always had a job because my parents made me get a job at 12. I was a paper girl, delivered papers, and I babysat, and I, did a lot of, cleaned the neighbor's house. I was doing all these things. And so I always had money, and I could buy myself junk food and candy. And I could eat that and feel better. Sorry about that. Here's an example of if it's worth doing shitty. I forgot to turn off my phone. So I started in on the only addiction that I found available. I think that if I hadn't taken up food, even though I couldn't get hold of drugs and alcohol at that point, I probably would have started doing some kind of self-harm, like cutting or poking, or I've had multiple clients tell me they would pull their hair out. So, that doesn't sound fun, but it actually distracts from the pain of the inner numbness, and it gives you something that you can focus on that is real and kind of congruent to what is happening inside that you can't feel. It's just ongoing pain that you're creating. So I didn't have if I hadn't had the food, I think I would have started self-harm, or even ended up, seriously mentally ill and not able to function. But the bulimia allowed me to keep going. And, people often express that their addiction is their enemy. And I try to emphasize that addiction is the thing we pick in order to survive at that point of our life with something that feels like it's not survivable. Would you like to speak to your version of that?
Well, with me, it was having a lot of feelings and emotions internally that had no physical connection. So I think it kind of started off as an accident. I remember.
So wait a sec. So were you numb like I was? Like, what was the thing that you were trying to escape from?
Well, I came from a very, very powerful fundamentalist Christian household. Like you said, if it's fun, don't do it. And very fear-based. I was afraid of everything. You imagine being a 7-year-old child being told that because you said you didn't take a cookie when you actually did, you were going to burn for all eternity unless you got up in front of this congregation of people and literally, spilled your guts and was judged openly by people you didn't really know or really didn't care to know. So you walked around with this constant developing fear. What am I going to do that's going to send me to hell? And so fear anesthetized me emotionally from a lot of things. Happiness, hope, being in the moment with something positive. I mean, we're all overshadowed by fear. But it was just inside of my head, and I had this weird emptiness inside of being disconnected. So I think the first time, and just to put it out there, I did cut. My hands and feet are covered in scars because I was a clumsy child, so it was really easy to tell people, oh, I fell, or it was a tree, or I was on my bike and I got too close to a fence. And come to find out, people weren't paying that kind of attention to me anyway, so I did not have to make excuses for it. But whenever I found myself in one of those empty, hollow states of mind to where I wasn't connected to anything, it started off with an X-Acto knife, just making just small cuts. And it was like that initial sharp sting of focus, it was oddly gratifying. I know that may sound really hard to fathom for some of you, but it was kind of like, you're having a heart attack and you pop the nitroglycerin tablet under your tongue and all of a sudden your heart starts to level out. It was kind of a similar thing. It was kind of like my nitroglycerin tablet. It was like, I'm freaking out. I don't feel anything. I have all these thoughts. And then that one little tiny cut, usually between my knuckles, I was like, oh, I could, go back into whatever it was I needed to do. But as you can see, it became problematic because the more complex the problems became, the more I needed to artificially give myself sensations. And yeah, there were things with food. I thought I was one of the few men in the world that had an eating disorder, but much like Victoria, there was a period of bulimia. And part of that was activity-based. She was a gymnast, but I was into martial arts, and we got weighed before every tournament. And there was like this tremendous fear of going up a weight class because you weren't going to be as strong as the next person. So as performance time came, there was a whole lot of food denial. And then if I fell off track and ate too much versus how much I thought I'd been working out, had to get rid of it. And that became cyclic all the way up until I went to the military, to where every calorie counted. But I know now that had I had an ally, had I had someone that I could trust and talk to explain it to me, even I had an amazing relationship with my grandmother, but she saw me as this little cuddly, angel-y type of chubby cherubim child. And I didn't want to ruin that by telling her that I had all these crazy, weird thoughts. So even the person I trusted most in life, I couldn't share what was going on inside of my head for fear of being rejected by her as well. Mm-hmm. So there was just so many different moving pieces to my evolution that now in my mid-50s, I'm just now starting to connect and identify. And I know, like in my household, you just did not go see a therapist, Victoria. You did not bring family business out into the public. You kept that to yourself. No one had a right to know. And even to the extent of being church people lying about it. If someone asks you what's going on, you tell them something about school or that you didn't score a point. But they didn't want to know that at home, the two people who were supposed to protect me, these two biblically correct people were ignoring me, and then when they weren't ignoring me, they were abusing me. But around their church peers, everything had to appear perfect. So, not that I can blame my parents for all this, but I learned to lie at a very young age to hide what I was feeling. And it was because I had to make sure that their image was protected. So it's just so many things that...
Which again, addiction or connection, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're hiding everything about who you are, mm-hmm. both out in your family, but out in the world. It was the expectation that if you have a need or if you are struggling, you're weak. And also, don't share family business. That is the family culture you grew up in. And literally, I was told in my family that we had family secrets and you weren't supposed to air family secrets. So, what are you doing? You're cutting people off. You're cutting your children off from their ability to connect and share what it is they need to share in order to, start to deal with their pain, their feelings.
And again, just to draw on the similarities of that, we came from literally two different sides of the railroad track. And showing feelings, in my household, unless it was remorse, whether it was the outward appearance of penance, anything else, you couldn't be too happy, and you definitely did not have a right to be sad. You got 3 meals a day, you had a roof over your house, over your head, and you have clothes on your back, so you're supposed to just be happy, and that was never the case for me. I always felt like I was out of place, kind of like the analogy of being left in a box on a doorstep, and never being able to connect to your peers or your parents because you did not belong there. And I felt that for my entire life at home, that I did not belong. And so there was, I don't know if this was an addiction, but I had several imaginary friends. I did have periods of depression that were so dark that I think I actually hallucinated sea creatures coming to life and having conversations with me. We'll talk about that later on. But this was all me looking to connect to something that made sense to me, something I can hold on to, something to give me comfort. And in the absence of those real and tangible things, I slowly began to discover substances. And I guess one of the big breakaway points for me was the military. So much regimented lifestyle, so much activity. I didn't have a whole lot of time to do unhealthy things. Because, throwing up your food meant no calories, which meant falling out of a run, which meant scrutiny. And I definitely didn't want any more of that.
Right. So, anyway, there's so many different ways that we lose track of ourselves. And, one of the more common ways, of course, and this is not the only way, is violence, right? Children are hit, whipped, beaten, verbally, just horrifically verbally abused, sexually assaulted in their families or in their communities. Some of the things people have told me, which I do not want to, have in other people's heads, are just beyond the pale. Just realize that Nazi Germany did not only live in Germany. Humans are humans, and some of the things people think of to do to children, I'm not surprised anymore, but it just saddens me. And pretty soon, that pain, and it can start very young, just builds up and builds up and builds up, and pretty soon it is larger than that person's ability to tolerate. And, the point of therapy or having others support you is to kind of give you a big enough container that pain has somewhere to go, where you can actually start to process that pain. But, abuse is not the only thing that causes that lack of connection. People think of it as, it has to be this violence. And I really want to emphasize that lack of emotional connection in a family is extremely harmful. But oftentimes people will say, well, that person had everything, not just food, shelter, and clothing, but like a really nice place to live and a private school and, the best and nicest clothes, nicest thing of everything, except that no one was actually connecting to them. Parents were like either always at work or they were out trying to ingratiate themselves to the rest of the world and earn status. And they weren't able to just sit and lovingly connect with their children. And so those kids are like, that's like even more confusing. It's so obvious when you're being whipped with a belt, at least this day and age, that that is harmful behavior. But many, many people have this lack of connection that causes them to, think of connection as like, survival, food, shelter, and clothing, right? Like we all need those things, the basics of survival. But if you don't have connection, you are also going to sort of be stunted and distorted. Like think of a tree growing out of a rock, like you're not getting an essential nutrient. I always say it's like you're not getting vitamin C and you have spiritual rickets, right? Connection is essential to the mental health of human beings. And so not having connection within our families is a very potent piece of losing connection with ourselves and others.
So all of this, as we have our discussions, Victoria and I, the amount that I'm learning about what I thought was normal isn't, and the isolation that I forced myself into thinking that I was the only one experiencing this, it seems to turn out that I'm kind of status quo.
I would not say that, honey.
Well, I mean, I'm not alone
Yeah.
in what I experienced, but I do know that there are a lot of people that I met in the military who talked about lives that were similar to mine. We had similar stories to tell. Right. And I'm sure as we go forward, there'll be more stories that come out. It's hard to believe that we're almost at a half an hour, which is what we slotted for this segment.
Okay, well, maybe we need to wrap it up. Michael and I always have a lot to say. If you hung out with us for a while, you'd probably be like, oh my God, do those people ever shut up?
We're very entertaining on road trips, though.
Oh, well, we think we're funny.
Yeah, we definitely think we're funny.
But we also have a lot of serious things that we have, conversations that we've had together, and, a lot of learning.
Well, it's been really cool to finally put wheels under this project, and we're hoping that you'll take time to watch us grow with our ability to produce and record. I mean, as Victoria said, anything worth doing is shitty. And though I have a background in film and journalism, it's not been something I pursued since college. So it's like, finding my balance again and learning the nuances to bring you guys quality. So we're probably going to get better. We will get better as we go forward.
Oh, we're getting better,
so,
for sure.
You'll notice that, we're going to try to add, better technical elements moving forward. So strap in. It's going to be a ride, and we appreciate you taking the ride with us.
Yep, I'm really thankful to be doing this, but I am especially thankful to my partner, Michael Jones, who's just such a wonderful man and an amazing human being.
Well, thank you. You give us too much time, we'll just go into a complimentary warfare here. So we just want to thank you for joining us and being a part of our project and a part of our own path to discovery about, certain aspects of our life. So we will see you guys next time. And we will work really hard at putting clear and concise links on the bottom of our screen, so you'll let us know how successful we are.
But it probably won't be perfect.
Probably not. That said, thank you for watching, and we will see you on our next episode.